Brian O'Loughlin, formerly of Movement 101, formerly of Telos, now of Kinesis.
Hello, sir.
Hello. Tell me about a story that you tell yourself that holds you back in life.
Lots of stories. Too many stories, actually.
Give me one.
Well, I suppose even what I'm doing right now and helping people, am I good enough? I said to you as well a few weeks ago, like, you know, what is it that I do? There's so many stories, like professionally, personally, physically, emotionally, mentally, that hold me back constantly. And I think it holds us all back, basically. And because we're going to talk about this, obviously, but I just as we're talking here now, maybe they never go away. Isn't that probably the case?
Possibly.
But like, you know, even if you quote unquote succeed, like, you know, I think if you're doing, there's always a narrative, always a story, always a history, always an experience that is being played. But I suppose we're going to talk about this is that we're certainly at a stage of our life that we have identified an awful lot of things that hold us back, and we don't necessarily need to feel 100% to still get an outcome despite these narratives or stories that hold us back.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, there's a few bits at play here for me. I think all of us, you alluded to it there, live our lives, and the lens through which we see the world is often, well, not often, but pretty much always influenced by how we've grown up and the things that have happened to us, and that creates a narrative in our own head, a story that we tell ourselves, and that dictates how we interact with the world. So, for example, something happens to you when you're a child, that influences how you feel, you attach a meaning to that, and that is how you now see the world. So every time you approach a situation, maybe a similar situation going forward, you have a certain story built around that, and because it's your experience, your lived experience, that is the world to you. That's everything to you, because that's the only experience you have.
Your perception is your reality.
Your perception is your reality. Exactly. So you've built a perception at a very young age. And as we know, when you're young, those memories are formative. They create your impression of the world, and they're very, very hard to unravel or break. So I think this is not news to any of us, but what I have found recently, and we've talked about this, so I can share that this is also something you have found, is that as we become a little bit more aware of some of the things we're struggling with, we start to realize with help that a lot of the struggle actually comes from us, the story that we're telling ourselves and the way we're approaching a certain situation. For example, how we would have come across some of these would be in our businesses. So there'd be certain instances where we might be struggling to break through a certain plateau or struggling with a specific mission. And it's very clear to you when I say to you, I'm dealing with this problem, that I am the problem. And likewise, when you tell me about a problem, I'm like, that's just fucking you. Like, why don't you do it these 9 other ways?
And not even that, though. The worst thing is, so then you come to me with a problem, like, yeah, but man, look at this. It's so obvious what you should do.
Yeah.
And then you say the exact same thing to me.
Exactly.
But again, actioning on that thing is where the struggle comes.
100%.
Because,
yeah. And
again, that perception.
And in that moment then, because my perception, and a lot of this is subconscious now at this level, it's just built into, I've built decades of behaviors on this initial story. So now I'm not even thinking necessarily this is a story I tell myself when I come across a situation. I'm just acting because I've built up this repetition and this behavior and these neural pathways. So it's easy for you to see that, but that it's just me and who I am. That's the story I tell myself. And a lot of us nowadays be familiar with that language. This is just who I am. I'm just this type of person. I've always been this way, etc., etc., etc. And so the journey now at the moment for me and for you, since we've had this conversation, is to try and identify the areas where we're the problem in business, relationships, personal growth, physical, whatever it might be. I've had some examples in sport that I can share as well, and develop some awareness around what those stories are we're telling ourselves, and then learn how to circumvent or take action despite the story that we're telling ourselves. So I think we'll discuss some of that today and some of the frameworks that we're working on using. Again, this is new enough territory for me anyway. But I think it might be interesting to explore some of the strategies and frameworks that people have helped me start to work on. And ultimately, I think this comes down to something I've talked about a lot on the podcast, is what's the line that we draw between doing the work. For those who aren't watching, I'm doing air quotes here, doing the work, i.e. a lot of people talk about like going to therapy and personal development and
internal work,
internal work, the shadow work, all this kind of stuff. We hear a lot about that nowadays. And where's the line between spending a lot of time doing that and actually living your life? Because what are we doing the work for if not to live a better life? And I think a lot of the time one can get caught up in doing the work and forget that the goal here is actually to apply that to living and experiencing life in a better way. And sometimes I find in business, like all the self-help stuff and business help stuff and all the podcasts and stuff you can watch and YouTube videos and stuff, you could be consumed by just consuming all of that information, trying to figure out what the issue is and what the problem is, when actually the problem is just your inability to take action on certain things. Because what I found is I'm getting the same messages over and over and over and over again. I'm just not taking action on them for some reason. And when I really dig into it, the reason is some block that I have, because it's something about myself. I'm telling myself, you said, I'm not enough. How is that manifesting in my business or my life or relationship? So building awareness around that now is kind of where I'm at on that journey.
Yeah, I think I shared it last time on the podcast, but the idea of procrastination being the inability to deal with difficult emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, speaks to all of us when we don't do the harder thing. And we often, as you said, unconsciously, maybe go and do the easier thing, or maybe we just can't deal with the fear or the insecurity or whatever that emotion might be to get the work done.
Yeah.
And that's what we're kind of getting to, I think.
Yeah. So to identify what this might actually look like, because that was a little bit abstract, some of the stuff we shared there. You mentioned fear, you mentioned insecurity. I think there's a lot of stuff around anxiety. There's a lot of stuff around overwhelm, real discomfort.
What do you mean real discomfort?
Almost a physical discomfort. So I have a coach now at the moment who's helping me work through some of this stuff. And he was asking me, when you have to do something that's important, you've decided this thing is important, I'm going to do this thing, why don't you get it done? And I was like, I don't know. So the deeper we got into that, it transpired that whenever the important thing is due to get done, so I'll schedule, I put in the notebook, I'll do the fucking Trello card, I'll do all the bits and bobs, and it's going to get done at 6:50 tomorrow morning. I'll wake up, I'll bounce out of the bed, you do all the other bits you're meant to do. And then somehow between getting the cup of tea and sitting down, my laptop's ready, everything's good to go, and getting the thing done, I get to the end of the day and you're like, oh, did you get that thing done? You're going to get done. I was like, oh, no. And you say, why? And I'll give you 9 other different things that are as important, but I didn't get the thing done. So he was asking me, like, what is that? What happens in that moment? And when it comes down to it, there's some level of physical discomfort there. And it could be just fleeting, but there's a resistance to doing that thing because it's new or it's something that I'm not super comfortable with. And then there's some sort of story I'm telling myself about why this is scary. So I'm going to be embarrassed, or in my case, a lot of it is, if I do this thing I've talked about for a long time, I'll be held accountable and judged for it.
Well, that's actually a big thing for you that's come up. So
Yeah.
if you actually go and do this thing, there's almost a standard that you have to live up to.
Now I've set a standard. And a story that I tell myself, again, another narrative is other people are going to judge me for it. And he was like, no one even knows you're doing it. No one's going to judge you. But you have decided that you will be judged and held accountable. And therefore there's a level of fear for some reason attached to that. And you've built this whole thing around it. And that manifests for me as like a physical resistance to sitting down and doing this. And people might be familiar with the feeling of like, you have this thing and you just cannot make yourself do it. You almost have to force yourself.
Yeah.
The War of Art was the book. What's the author's name again? It'll come back to me.
Stephen Pressfield.
Was it Pressfield? And he talks about that resistance when it comes to writing or doing anything that's, it's just difficult to start. But once you're in it, you're actually fine. You're in that flow state. Usually that resistance, in my experience, has something to do with one of these stories you're telling yourself. There's a negative outcome that you have created in your head for doing this, and it makes you feel anxious and uncomfortable. And like, I feel it in my stomach. You feel a little bit like, oh. So you will do anything to relieve that discomfort. Examples: reach for the phone and scroll. Other small tasks that aren't as important but that are much more comfortable for you. So you can say, well, I did 20 things today. And you'd be like, well, what about that one important thing? I was like, no, but Brian, you're not listening. I did 20 other things. Like, none of those things are going to move you towards your goal. And there's some part of me, obviously, that believes is if I move towards my goal, then I'm stepping up a level, I'm raising the standards, and therefore I could fall. It's higher. I can fall from higher or something. So this is my story that I'm kind of working through at the moment. Where that comes from, I don't know, which will bring us to our point later on. Do I actually need to know, or do I need to start to develop a way to experience the discomfort? Because that's going to take years to unravel exactly what that is, and have some sort of framework that supports me moving through it anyway. And that was the War of Art was about that as well, as when it comes to writing, like just having a method for being able to sit down and just get the first page out, get the first few words out, and then you're into that flow. You've broken most of the resistance.
Because as you're talking there, what always comes up, I think for both of us as well, is the idea that when you have an awful lot of awareness around what you're not doing, and then not doing it, it can almost sometimes stunt you even more to actually get it done, because you're reinforcing the idea that
guilt as well.
I know I'm not doing it. There's a level of shame there, going like, you've done it again. The thing you're trying to do, and even if you don't, like I said, understand why, you certainly know you're not getting the thing done. And as Mark Logan said, shame perpetuates more shame. And you're often going to kind of just keep doing that negative emotion or again, distract, basically not try to work through or feel what this thing is.
Do you remember we did that? We did an episode on fear. Do you remember we did that? There was a piece, I can't remember, it was a poem or a line or something about that, but it ended with that bit and it's another smoke signal that signifies to you, yet again, you haven't done the thing you said you were going to do. For some people, that's the motivation. That's the activation energy. I have found for a lot of us, it's the opposite. Because there are so many other options to soothe the discomfort, we now feel doubly uncomfortable because I said I would do it and I didn't. So I didn't do the thing, and now I let myself down. So now I feel shame about not doing the thing.
Yeah.
So what I'll do now is I'll go and eat or drink or smoke or scroll or if I can do something else, whatever like that.
Anything else, basically.
Anything, because that'll help me soothe the double pain I'm now feeling. And then that means it's even less likely that I'll do the thing again because now I've reinforced that negative story. Let's use the gym, for example. I want to go to the gym tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I don't go to the gym tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So now I haven't gone to the gym. So I haven't moved forward. I haven't actually taken the action. And now I feel terrible because I haven't gone to the gym. And I said I will go to the gym. And now I believe that story even more that I am just not someone who can go to the gym. It's hard for me to go to the gym. So now I'm reinforcing that negative belief, which is just a fucking story.
Yeah.
It's all happening up in your head. It's just a story. But it stems potentially from something in the past. And then that builds into habits and stuff like that. So that fact that it can kind of reinforce itself and probably does reinforce itself over time doesn't help. But also leans into the other point that we're making is, do we have to go back and unravel those 35, 36 years of behavior and habit and belief and trauma and story to get anything done? Because otherwise, how are you supposed to get anything done? You spend your entire life.
Well, that's what we're going to discuss, isn't it? People potentially are looking at that as the quote unquote solution when in reality is actually no moving forward. Exactly,
yeah. So to follow this pathway forward, before we get to some of the solutions and strategies and actual frameworks, there is a discussion happening at the moment around this in a slightly different context, which we became aware of recently on another podcast. And it's linking what we've just described. Something happens in the past, develops a belief or a story that reinforces over time, becomes a behavior, becomes a habit, dictates who you are, you identify with it. That identify piece is becoming very interesting because nowadays there's a lot of people talking about, which I think is a very positive thing. Let me just say this to start. Things like therapy and shadow work and personal development and personal growth, mental health. Fantastic. Net positive. Absolutely brilliant. But I heard a very interesting conversation the other day. It was actually with Mr. Chris Williamson and Freya India, I think the girl's name was. She does a lot of writing on young females. You heard the same podcast.
Yeah.
And she talked about this phenomenon that seems to be occurring now with, specifically, she spoke about young females, but people identifying with the trauma now and identifying with the conditions and identifying with therapy, and they're using therapy language. It's becoming part of their vernacular. And sometimes I forget that now. I'm in my mid to late 30s, I suppose, now. But a lot of people have grown up with some of the stuff that I was exposed to in my late teens, mid 20s.
Even therapy wasn't really spoken
spoken about. Well, now it's mainstream and everyone should have a therapist or something. I hear quite a lot. And but what seems to be happening is there's a lot of people starting to get really, really lost in the tools, the therapy and the work and all that kind of stuff, and start to identify with that as a sense of identity, replacing
the experience.
So now it's all about my story, my trauma, my anxiety. What was another one she was talking about? Attachment styles. So what are some of the attachment styles?
I even remember cohabitants, attachment style. But basically, even what she was saying was that some of the relationships that these women would have would just be normal relationships that would turn sour. And now they were looking to pathologize the reasoning for that breakup. What was wrong with them? Why did this go left or right? Why was the case of this actually being? So I want to start for a second, because you were talking there, right? Because you kind of see this a bit more, the potentiality of why this is the case and why we're looking at identifying things because we don't really have much meaning in our lives, and potentially the getting rid of religion being a big focus. So I'll go back to me and the ignorance I would have had around religion, because I remember being whatever age you are in third class. What are you, about 14? No, not 14. No, you're 10, are you?
Third class. Not third year.
No, third class.
Third class, you would
8,
be
9, 10?
Yeah, 9. Yeah,
anyway,
8 or 9.
I was an altar boy. The priest came in. I was like, who wants to be an altar boy? I was like, yeah, I definitely do. So I was an altar boy for 2 years. So there's some element of kind of religion that obviously kind of had a little call to me. And then I would have went to mass when I was younger, more so being told to go to mass rather than kind of wanting to go. My parents would have done that. And then I would have had beliefs around the church and of what's happened and it's bad and whatever. But now as a parent and me being older and having experienced life, a lot of difficulties throughout my life, just mentally, emotionally, and just the experience that we all have of life. And I'm not falling back to religion, but I certainly understand its importance.
Yeah.
And if I look now at Sailor, we purposely brought her to a Catholic school because of the values they instill. And I think what we at least did have with religion were these values. There was a strong footing of how you were to live in society, of what a good person does do, of how we're all meant to interact, i.e. be good to your neighbor. And all these things like, yeah, well, that's obvious. It's kind of obvious what it is. But now maybe that's what we're seeing when we don't have that. Because then you can go anywhere. And if we don't have that meaning, we're not kind of brought up with that kind of foundational meaning. Well, as humans, we need to have that meaning. So we're going to go and search for that. And obviously women, by the sounds of things, are kind of looking down that avenue. And they flipped it on its head with the men and the Jim Bros and then the Andrew Tates. And, again, you're looking for your identity in this world that is vast and isn't necessarily giving you a strong footing. That's what I believe is potentially happening kind of now.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's, I would have thought about this quite a lot with the religion thing. I had a similar upbringing to you, went to mass a lot, etc., because my parents wanted us to go. And it's a story. It's another story. It's a story you're being told of what a good person is, what a bad person is. Some people may agree or disagree with, like, you are a bad person if you do this and you're a good person.
Going to hell, etc.
Going to hell and stuff like that. But ultimately it was a story about, and it was a set of personal philosophies. Like we talked about personal philosophy before, and it was a set of standards that we all held as a community.
Yeah.
And that helped us identify. And I find looking back at my family, I think it helped the family unit build their own sense of values because there was a starting point.
Yeah, there's a system or a framework there.
Yeah, there's a framework, exactly. We don't lie, we don't steal, we try and treat other people well. Now, within that, we can tweak and adapt this and become, we'll go this way and you'll go that way.
And then maybe that's where the issue was, though, where the church may put down too much of their rules on the family.
Exactly.
And we couldn't do things we didn't want to do.
And became oppressive.
Yeah.
But people got rid of, as you said, the baby with the bathwater. Everything was thrown away.
Yeah.
So we lost all of that framework. So yeah, I do think that's a core driver. And I wrote down here, the world reinforces the story a lot of the time. So this leans in nicely to that. That's definitely a core driver. It leaves a vacuum. We've spoken, you mentioned Andrew Tate there before. We spoke about young men and why someone like that can come in and command such respect and following from young men. It's because there's a vacuum there. There's nothing else. And he comes in with a really strong message and young men have responded to that strong message. Now, the messenger and the delivery leaves a lot to be desired, but you can't deny that there's a message there that has resonated with a certain amount of people. It's not just fluke. And the therapy thing has done a similar thing. But the problem I find with a lot of this stuff, just like they found with religion, is there are also negatives to this. And with the Tate thing, obviously it came with a lot of misogyny and aggression and all that kind of crack. With the religion thing, it came with a lot of oppression and a lack of freedom and a lot of judgment and shame. And then obviously the abuse of power that was involved with that. With the therapy thing, it's slightly more insidious, I feel. And listening to Freya India speak about it the other day, it seems on the outside like something that's quite positive.
Yep.
So it's very hard to look at it and go, that's terrible for our young people. But how they described it in that conversation, which I thought was very interesting, was it was like religion without the personal responsibility. Because a lot of the therapy is all about you and all about how you deserve this and it's positive reinforcement and your trauma. And having experienced therapy myself, and I know you have too, I understand where that comes from. It's quite empowering and it's important to have some positive self-talk.
Give that space to
explore that. Yeah. However, it's not a very effective way, in my opinion, for interfacing with the world because it's not all about you. And when you go out in the world, it's actually the opposite. It's about, in my opinion, service and connection and compassion and love and care and all that kind of stuff, which is external. But we've created this whole language. She was talking about therapy talk, like TikTok, where it's a lot of young women going on talking about their traumas and all that kind of stuff. And it's become the norm, but it has, it's almost an abdication of any responsibility for everything else. So it's another story you're telling yourself about how you are this person with this thing, anxiety, for example. I have anxiety. As opposed to you are someone who is experiencing a human emotion, as you said earlier on, a normal human emotion or a normal human interaction with a partner, which could be good or bad. and responding in a normal way, and I'm using the word normal again, quote unquote here,
Yeah.
because what is normal, but not pathologizing it, not identifying your entire life story with this experience you're having right now. And ultimately, her opinion of the therapy thing is similar to ours now. It's holding people back. It's holding us back because we're telling ourselves this story, which isn't objectively true, but subjectively might be true for you.
And also just think about that, because we've used them. I'm sure Melissa has used them as well. The idea of like, I can't because.
Yeah.
And again, if you're just adding more of that awareness around your traumas or your experience or your attachment issues, whatever they may be, you're potentially just putting more barriers into you doing the action and maybe waiting for the perfect moment or the quote unquote right time to do it.
Yeah.
And like, again, as you're saying there about life and what happened, like that's just, life is going to wait for you. Like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So what I would probably say, I think, is that, like, are we then teaching people to not be as resilient and deal with the issues of what life brings?
That asks a deeper question, what is resilient? But actually, anxious avoidant, there's an attachment style.
Okay, right.
Anxious avoidant will not have any. Not an expert in attachment styles, by the way, but just what I mean by that, you mentioned that example of your partner does a certain thing or says a certain thing, and you respond by saying, oh, I'm responding this way, I feel this way because of my anxious avoidant attachment style, as opposed to, that was a shit thing for him to do.
Yeah. And that is a human being who's doing something that might occur in the future and is potentially very, very normal.
Exactly, yeah. So stop telling yourself a story that it's to do with you.
Well, let's even go back to that, because I've been consuming quite a lot of content around the idea of marriage. And what marriage used to be was not necessarily done for love. It was done as a commitment to go, I'm going to be with this person and they're going to be with me. And together, we're actually going to we're going to have difficulties. They're going to trigger me. They're going to show a side of me that I may not like, but I'm going to commit to not leave, and we can work together. Because without that person, they can't bring out the best side of me. This is necessary to actually have the whole of me, as opposed to going, no, let's get divorced. I'll be on my own in a corner, so no one can actually, quote unquote, trigger me or show me who I really am or the elements that I need to improve. And what I think it was a rabbi was saying, that what has changed over the last, couple of generations, is that people decided to get married for love. And the idea being is that, oh, I'm not in love anymore. I'm not willing to actually do this work anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now, again, I don't know if I would fully believe that, but it's definitely, you'd think, a happy medium there somewhere of going, like, because as you know, in your own relationship, and anyone listens to this, like, literally you have like discussions and fights and things happen. It would be much easier just to put the tools down and go, let's leave it. Well, obviously not with kids, but we just say if you don't have any responsibility.
Yeah.
Not to be triggered, not to actually deal with that. But then look at your relationship and my relationship. Genuinely, for me, over the last 8 or 9 years, the relationship has developed from those experiences.
He's not talking about me and Brian, by the way. He's talking about us with our respective partners.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, though, like, my relationship with Danielle is much more fruitful over the last 8 and 9 years from those quote unquote bad or difficult experiences. Because you're willing to work at it. They're willing to show you a side that's like, oh yeah. So again, let's go back to what we're saying here. Like, life isn't easy. And if we're going to, like, again, look for love, and I would have had that immaturity in my 20s. I remember being with a girl, God love her, 6.5 years, and going, I'm not in love. This was when it was like 6 years ago. Of course it wasn't, you retard. What are you talking about? Like, but that was my ignorance. That was my immaturity. And I'm better for it now, having experienced that. But like, that is just the case of actually life. Because what are the 3 things with life again? The uncertainty, the pain, and the work. They're constant. So I think, go back to what we're trying to talk about here. We're trying to lean into the uncertainty and into the pain with more empowerment or more desire or more, but like the uncertainty and the pain and the work, they're going to always be there.
Yeah. This is really interesting, right? Because one of the exercises I'm doing at the moment with my coach is creating a new lens for myself through which to see this. Not trying to rewrite the story completely, because that's a lot of work and it's not therapy we're doing, it's coaching. And how he described this to me was therapy is looking backwards and coaching is looking forwards. And I really like that. So, but they both have a place.
Yep.
But I find a lot of us just buy into the looking backwards part, thinking that when we get to the answer, we'll be able to look forwards. And that's linked with the story you mentioned earlier on. It will be okay when. I will do this thing when. This perfect set of circumstances aligns, and when I have enough money, when I have the house, when I have the blah, 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 then I'll start living, then I'll start doing. These are all things people are probably familiar with. I will do this thing that's making me uncomfortable because it's difficult when the circumstances are all right, but they're not right now. So all I have to do is work on the circumstances. But we both know from experience That literally never happens.
No.
Because the circumstances are constantly changing and will always change forever and ever and ever. And your inbox will always be full and there'll always be dishes on the counter. Not doing all of those things is never going to actually get you towards the closer to the thing. So he was talking to me about the lens through which I see the thing that's making me uncomfortable, as opposed to the story I'm telling myself. And on what you were saying there about, like, say it's a difficult relationship and the uncomfortable thing is a conversation you need to have with your partner, not to end it because it's going to make you more comfortable because you're moving away from the pain, but to actually address what's going on. That's an uncomfortable thing. So with his coaching, I would approach that as, okay, this is a really uncomfortable thing. I'm feeling all the physical symptoms. I am not going to tell myself a story about what this means. I'm going to acknowledge that I feel really uncomfortable and not worry about changing that either. Now, this is outside of the whole, are you regulated? Are you training? Are you sleeping? Because all of that stuff is fuel on the fire, which we'll touch on in a second. But now the lens that we're going to look at this difficult conversation with my partner is, I understand that growth and service to her in this relationship and service to me in this relationship lies on the other side of the conversation. So that's now how I look at this, as opposed to, oh, this is awful, this is uncomfortable, I want to move away from this. We should end this. I don't deserve this in a relationship. It's about, okay, I'm going to look at this differently. I know on the other side of that conversation there is the potential for.
So does that
growth.
mean then, through that lens you're saying there, that to some degree there's discomfort and pain that's necessary to have that outcome, the positive outcome you want to have?
Yes, which I've always said in a physical context. I've always said this on here. I believe in a self-inoculation of difficult things. Train and do things that are hard because you'd be better on the other side. But I wasn't applying it in other areas of my life.
Yeah.
Like, so we're talking in a business context with my coach. So we would look at a decision that's 6:50 a.m. I'm sitting down, I have to send this email about this big important thing. And now he wants me to look at that and say, get your ego out of this. It's not about you and what people are going to think of you. And you have to remove all of that and get really clear on, if you do this, what value are you going to add to your business or your community? And then understand that the cost of that is working through this discomfort and has nothing to do with you and your story and what you're telling yourself and your ego and all that kind of stuff. So, the preparation work, that doesn't just happen. The preparation work for that is get really clear on what this thing you're going to do is and why it's going to add value. And once you're clear on that, there's no denying it. The reason I'm not clear on that is because, as I said earlier on, I don't like putting it down because it then can be judged and held accountable. Yeah. So, like, we're going to, and in all of these areas, you can, when you feel that discomfort, you can identify, I'm uncomfortable not because of the thing, I'm uncomfortable because of something I'm telling myself about this thing. I'm not going to go back and figure out where it came from. Now I know what it is.
Is it, because as you're talking there, what's come up to me then is the truth. So it can be quite revealing.
Yeah.
To actually go, well, this is actually what it is.
Yeah.
And to look at that is really is revealing, or it brings up an emotion or a belief. It essentially just shows you in your naked self and goes, it's actually you.
Yeah.
And that can be very difficult to be like, oh, it's not this attachment. It's not something else that's outside of me. There's not something else I can fall back on and say, that is the reason. It's just me.
Exactly. So when I say to you, Brian, at the end of the day, you're like, did you get that thing done? I said, I got these 20 things done. You say to me, you're just afraid of doing that thing. I'm like, no. I had to do all these things and I'm justifying and I'm moving away and I'm distracted. And you're like, no. You're just afraid of doing that thing. And then I have to sit with that. But it's the sitting with it part that's where the real discomfort is. And you notice I'm saying I have to sit with that as opposed to try and go deep into my past and figure out exactly where it came from. I can do that, and that could potentially be helpful in the long term. And again, the value of therapy and space and shadow work and all cannot be overstated. It's incredible. But there's a balance. And right now, I said I need to do this thing. I want to do this thing because it's going to move me in the direction I want to move in life, business, relationship, sport, whatever. And it's that piece I find really interesting right now at the moment. Developing the awareness, number one. So I have a coach and I have you and I have Jill, all three of whom are more than happy to point out for me areas where I'm just talking shit and bullshitting myself. And that's part one, develop the awareness and the clarity. But then part two is, how am I actually now going to tomorrow morning get up at 6:50 and actually action that thing while still feeling uncomfortable? Because the discomfort is not going away.
Actually, even knowing that's going to be uncomfortable. So there's a huge knowing that this is not going to be a nice thing for me to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on the far side of that, and we've experienced this in different areas of our life, once you've done it, you've started the journey of telling yourself a different story. That thing was uncomfortable. It was a thing I didn't think I could do before. Subconsciously, usually, because I know I can send the email. I know I've sent an email before, but this email represents something much bigger. because it's going out and it's going to set off this cascade of
Yeah.
events or whatever. So now I've done that and nothing happened. That was negative. And actually something positive happened because someone came back and said, can't wait, this looks great. And you just have to file that away then and have a system for, because we have a negativity bias. 99% of the time we're going to believe the negative thing and ignore the positive thing. So again, on the other side of doing that thing, once you've built the framework to do it, you're going to have to sit and reflect and add that to the bank of, I have done this thing. Therefore, the next time, there's one little tick on the side if you've done this before. And the more of those little ticks you can build up, you start to reinforce a positive story. I am the type of person who can go to the gym in the morning. I am the type of person who can send that email in the morning. I am the type of person who can have the conversation with my partner. But the start, that resistance part, the war of art, Stephen Pressfield is a great place to start with this because it highlights this in another way. But that's the challenge. And I don't know if that challenge ever really goes away. You just build better systems for dealing with it.
Yeah, I remember I had a conversation with Dane Brown on my podcast, and he kept using even the idea of sitting with negative emotions. And then I kind of used the analogy of the gym, because we're all in the gym now, me and you, and it's not getting any easier, but you do get more equipped. And actually, you get a bit more intrinsic motivation because you've got that past experience of working through, of adapting, of getting stronger. And actually, you have the desire to push a little bit more.
Because I've seen what it can do, and I've become a different type of person as a result of that. And it's a fundamental change to your sense of identity.
Yes.
Because you're now attached, you've real proof.
And go back to that then. So even as you're talking there, because that's the idea, that could potentially infiltrate, dictate, or change your past experience based off actually changing.
Yeah.
You don't even necessarily need to shine a light on your past if you're able to act, get new evidence, and transmute that, because what happened in the past doesn't even fucking matter.
I am a firm believer of looking backwards only matters to the degree that it can help you moving forwards. So the deeper you go, for me, into your past doesn't necessarily lead to, because someone asked me before, like, do you not want to know why you feel this way? I was like, only if it's helpful moving forward.
Yeah.
Only if it actually, I don't want to know just to know. But you're not curious about like why you're like this. I'm literally not curious at all. I've no curiosity about that. But I'm intrigued as to how it could potentially help me moving forward. And in my experience, it's only about 20% of that deep dive, dark shadow work has actually ever helped me take forward steps. And there's lots of nuance to this as well. And there's lots of context to that. But I personally don't believe the answer is all the way back there. There might be one or two kind of core pieces about myself, like this feeling of not being enough. That's a real male thing.
Yes.
There's a lot of men I've spoken to don't feel like they're enough. And I don't believe that's necessarily as a result of our fathers or our society in the past.
Yeah.
I think that all has a role to play. But there's a fundamental need and desire in men to grow and build and be productive and move forward and conquer and create and do all these different things. And unless we've set our life up in a way that facilitates that, which a lot of us haven't, we're not going to feel that way.
Yeah.
Combine that with maybe your dad didn't tell you he loved you when you were smaller.
Well, even this, as you're talking there, because this is like the fundamental concept of the present is the idea that there is only now. You know, like the past and the future, they don't matter. Like they really don't matter in the sense of, as of right now, where we are, all that matters is here and now. And if you're not going to act now, that's because you're not actually here. You are thinking about the past or you are thinking about the future. Two concepts that essentially aren't real, and then they're going to dictate what you're doing right now. Yeah.
Let's see what you think about this, right? If I was to right now decide I am going to be a completely different person going forward. Now, I can't change like my patterns necessarily right now, like in my brain, but I could decide right now I want to be a completely different person. I want to be a happier person. I'm going to smile at everybody I meet, and I'm going to be overwhelmingly positive about every single problem I come across in my life. I can do that right now.
Yeah.
Like physically, I'm capable of doing that. And the more I do that, the more I'll actually reinforce those patterns and behaviors, and I will become that person. Would you agree with that?
100%.
So therefore, what you said rings really true then. The past doesn't matter as much as we are letting it matter. Now, I don't think it has no impact on us, because in my life, it has literally dictated almost every decision.
Well, no, if you are genuinely present right now and could be in that state continuously. So that's to some degree what enlightened people are, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're just in reality. They're not being pulled back by the past. They're not trying to get anywhere. They're not chasing some external goal or being distracted. They're literally in reality. But of course, to be enlightened requires what? I don't know. Fucking lifetimes of work, of being a monk, of doing the... So the issue you have then is, even to some degree, because you said at the very start, a lot of this stuff would be unconscious. That's within us. So a lot of the things we do are doing day to day, we're actually unaware of. There's to some degree a collective conscious. So again, what's expected even of men or people in general, then society, the external, the goals. And then as you said, we have these intrinsic things of external negative bias. So all these things are again to some degree ruling us again without our knowing. And then I would even question why we're having this conversation is because are we living in a world that is, designed as human beings? Have we adapted to what is around us in terms of the stimulus and the opulence and the opportunity and go back to meaning? Because generation ago, we didn't give a shit about meaning. We were just trying to fucking survive. That was the meaning.
Yeah.
And now me and you are survived. We don't need to be, but we could be in survival mode with a lack of meaning, even though we are completely safe. So as easy as what we're saying here, it's also extremely complex.
Yeah. Oh, it's very complex. Yeah. I'm trying to simplify it to have a conversation around it, but it's extremely
But
nuanced.
I think this is the funny thing though now, because then there is, but I think you're right. You could go back to it and say like, I could just start from scratch right now and do whatever I want to do. But most of us don't do that.
Because of the story. Let's talk about that one actually. That's a nice practical, I'm just checking your camera because I turned it off there by itself, but it's actually fine. Sunk cost bias.
Yeah.
So let's use that one as an example. A lot of us will never change the current, what's the word I'm looking for, trajectory of our life because we have spent too much time, effort, energy, money, etc. to get us to this point. So we think. That's a story we're telling ourselves.
Is that a good example of what I did? I did the opposite.
What did you do?
I left something and did my own thing from a thing that I had built up and just left, and I'm doing it.
But it wasn't the opposite because you had, you transcended it, but you had massive fear around doing it.
I don't know, of course. I know I did. But what I'm saying is, again, let's go back to kind of that idea. I think there's almost an element of like, say, so talk about what you're saying there. You've created a life or an identity or you've done something, and to get rid of that is difficult. To go the opposite way.
Yeah.
Or to say no to that anymore. That's what we're getting.
I've put so much into getting me to where I am now. There's no possible way I could do anything else. But the only thing that's realistically, in a lot of cases, in some cases that's true, in a lot of cases, the only thing that's going to suffer is your ego. You're going to be embarrassed.
I agree with that.
So, But you're telling yourself a story of, I couldn't possibly do that. That is not possible. I've put too much time. I couldn't go and start again and do something else. That's a story. And it's a story based on fear and anxiety and to a certain degree, normal. But you absolutely could in a lot of cases. And you did.
Yeah, but also there is a reality of your situation and what you have done. And now it's like, well, could I do that again? Because you've done it, it's real. But I think the biggest thing with that is starting from scratch again. And like you said, I think that's ego.
Yeah.
Because that's going back to, we'll just say 0 or 1, as opposed to potentially being a 50 or 100 or whatever that might be.
Yeah. And a lot of your story will probably be around, well, that was luck the first time,
exactly.
or that set of circumstances.
I did it then, I don't have more responsibility now, or whatever they think.
That's all just words.
Well, I'm going to go back to this now again, because I talk about presence, and like, so I'm going to try and explain something here around the idea of awareness as well. Because I think what we're touching on here then now is like, what is identity and what is being human and this meaning and what we're doing here on this earth. Because if you really pull it back, like Daniel and Brian, they were just names that were given. Are they real people? We've had experiences again that had led to beliefs. We have emotions that we've had from these past experiences, and we take all of these things on as fact. When if we just look at what we have done, because we've done so many things in our lives, both of us, and anyone listen to this, that I'm sure you would say I could never do, and you have done. So there's plenty of proof to do things, and even just humans in general. Like for millennia, go back to literally history. Humans have constantly done things that were never done before. So there's like a possibility of what we can do is real to all of us. But we would just take, say, the experience of the life we have now, of what is around us, as fact, as limited, as like we can't really do these things despite the things that we have done. But you're right, it's a story. But I kind of go back to this as well. I think a lot of this then would be to do with the collective consciousness. Because if you kind of want to go, what I think we're saying here, which is kind of against the grain, so the vast majority of people aren't doing this, you've got to go against what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, so this kind of links in with that point we made earlier about the world reinforces a lot of our negative stories. So, for example, want to go to the gym, didn't go to the gym. That's reinforcing the story. I am not enough, and BMW says, if I get this car, I'll be better. Therefore, I am not enough. That's the world reinforcing my story of I am not enough because I haven't got that BMW yet. And then what was the example you just gave there? The collective, sorry.
Yes.
So society then, most, and I think you're correct, I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of people don't live in the present. We all live in this world of distraction, and whether it's through necessity, i.e. you live in a poorer country where you literally are just trying to think about the next fucking meal that you get or whatever that, you're not necessarily in the self-actualization space there and thinking about the presence and your sense of identity and purpose. Or you live in a country like we do in Ireland, and you have all of your basic needs met for the most part, and the rest of the world is just chaos and competition and jobs and money, and you have to have a nice house and you have to do all these different things, and that's the collective mindset. So all of those things are actively resisting you developing a sense of presence in the right now, and you overcoming some of the negative self-talk and the stories and the narrative that you have, because most of those things actually reinforce the negative, not encourage you to create a new narrative for yourself. And there is not a lot of, I know there's a lot of conversation now about like entrepreneurship and the opportunity and all that kind of stuff. But realistically, when you talk to most people, I don't know what your experience is like, when I talk to most people outside of this circle, because this circle is different, because most of the people I meet here are people who are running their own businesses or doing podcasts or doing things that are a little bit different. Not saying that's good or bad, just they're the people I interact with. But outside of this circle, I find myself, if I go to social events, I go to weddings, I meet other groups of people, there's an overwhelming sense of this is safe and the way we're doing things, and everything out there is a bit mad and a bit different, a bit chaotic and a bit weird and a bit, and that in itself is enough for you to go, oh yeah, I should be over here doing this thing, even though it doesn't feel good and it's not really fulfilling and I don't really understand who I am or what I'm doing here. It's the collective. That's what everybody thinks that's safe, and that's another way you can reinforce less than helpful or negative stories, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's funny then with that collective, because if you look at life in general and everything that's in this world, like a human being did create it. It wasn't a thing before.
World.
Yeah, well, the things in the world, say.
Oh.
But like anything, it's to do with like technology or advancement in anywhere. A human being was at the forefront of building or creating this thing. And granted, smarter people and less smart people, but in general, they have the same DNA as us. Like we're all similar in that sense. So the possibility of making change in your life, the possibility of creating something new is available to all of us. That is available. And the difference then being, you're talking about going back to the collective and the safety, that's a very visceral thing. There's certainty in that normalcy. But I think then if you're looking at that safety and that normalcy in the collective, do you have to give up the creativity, the meaning?
So I don't even think there's actual certainty. There's a sense of security, but it's not real security.
It's not certainty, though. It's certainty. It's not security because they.
But if you're not aligned with who you actually are,
yeah,
is it actual certainty or is it a false sense of certainty? So if you're doing something and you get your bills paid every month and your mortgage is taken care of, and that's great. It's amazing. But is that certainty? Like what are we doing? What are we doing here?
Well, and that's fair enough. And I would agree with that then. But that's what I mean. I don't know if you're going to be asking that question in that certainty.
No.
So that's what I mean. It's more so you're being dragged along by that and you're getting the bills paid. So things are okay. Therefore, there's no need to rock the boat. Even though I know there's more here, I don't have that level of clarity or even that desire or energy to kind of find out, you know? So it's much easier to go back to that certainty. But then, as you're saying there, I would question, is that living? So even the conversation we have here, and we struggle, and it's chaotic, and it's a little bit, it is difficult.
Yeah, I feel like this podcast has been difficult.
Yeah, so do I. But I still think there's more living in that, though, because that's life. That's what I mean. That's living. That's living.
Yeah.
Actually that.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, good. And this is going slightly off topic, but I agree with you. But I agree with you because we're very similar and we found each other on this pathway in this thread of life. I think there's many ways of doing this, but I like the language you used there. I don't think everybody needs to do a podcast, start a business, or any of these fucking things. But I do question how aligned most of us are. Even us now doing, like we're trying to figure out what it is we want to do. And we've got these tools that we're using at the moment. But the more we do, the more we're like, oh, this feels, what's going on? And we feel this like, just this friction the whole time.
But would it be easier to go back and get a job?
So much easier. But it wouldn't as well because I'd be embarrassed and that my ego would die and all these fucking stories. So like, I think I did. I draw this before. Like, we built this company. I'm drawing a box here, right? We built this company so we could stand on top of it to give us the lifestyle that we want. A lot of people start companies that they want them to be lifestyle companies. I want to run my own business because I want to be my own boss. I want to get up when I want to get up. I want to spend time with my family. I tell myself this. You tell yourself that. Almost every business owner I meet says the same thing. What we end up doing in a lot of cases is building this box that we're stuck inside. We build this thing that fucking traps us, and we work more hours for less money than we would if we work for somebody else, because we haven't accounted for the fact that we're going to hold ourselves back in this business. I have lost count in the last 6 weeks the amount of people who've actually said to me, do you know what this could be? Could be. Not what it is, because most people say, oh, it's all amazing, podcast studio, the content's great, the people are coming in and out, to just see all this stuff and so many people the last while have said, you know what this could be? And what they're saying is, you are in the way, because the idea is great, the business is great, the clients are great, the whole thing looks great, it's all great, but you're holding it back. And
that's fine, because I say to you and flip and said, and I would agree with everything you're saying here, and I understand it because I fucking know you.
And you're one of the people who say it.
Yeah, but grand, then isn't that the hero's journey, is what I'm saying? Because it would be easier to get off the track, like I said, and get it away. But the actual hero's journey for you is to lean into that and to find an answer.
The point I'm making is, I'm now inside the box at the moment.
Yes.
And I could be there for the rest of my life.
You could be.
And it could just be a more uncomfortable version with less certainty of working in an office. Well,
let's go back to the very kind of start of this podcast then, because the idea, I think, with this then is that story and that meaning you're going to give you being in that box and the opportunity you have to get outside that box.
Exactly. And what I tell myself about what the box is, and the trust I have in the box and me, and the story I start to tell myself, because ultimately, it's not a personality deficit, but it's a lack of belief in me in certain areas that has stopped me from stepping outside of the certainty of the box, because I don't like these people's boxes. So I built my own box and I got inside that. And now I have my own version of certainty.
Safety of that. But
it's still a safety. And which means I'm still not doing what I say I want to do with this whole thing, which is step outside and explore and push and learn and grow. So back to the lens we looked at earlier on. Stop looking at that as
a you thing.
It's not a you thing. And the more you think it's a you thing, the more you'll be stuck inside that box and nothing will grow. Your responsibility to this whole thing, if this is what you say that you want, which is the first step, figure out what you want. But your responsibility then to that thing, that vision, is to get really clear about it, and then to identify where you're holding it back, the stories you're telling yourself, and not to go into your past and trauma and fix all your past traumas and stuff like that. Do that if you'd like, but to create systems that support you moving forward. That's your responsibility, and bring the ego out of it.
Well, I think then what you're talking about here, cause I think it's something called self-forgetfulness is what they talk about. And the idea is exactly what you're explaining there. It's basically you take the focus off yourself and you bring it out to the service and to the world.
Exactly.
So, but I think everyone can resonate with this, because I think everything you're explaining, I have the same idea of me holding myself back, of that lack of belief, if I'm not good enough. The best work I've done in my life, in my career, you're the exact same, is putting that focus on somebody else, is actually building what you have done. And fine, there's more potential, there's more opportunity. You can see where you're holding yourself back. But I think we're all doing that, even the people who are succeeding. And the only difference is, to break through those plateaus, is again, do you really have that desire? Because I think that's where the true growth comes. And it's not necessarily just for the external. It's actually to show your true self, who you really are and what you could do. Because when I'm talking about you specifically here, when you're in that flow state, when you're in that present state, when you are living in that self-forgetfulness state, you're an animal. You do really good work. Your clients this is amazing. You feel extremely fulfilled. You really enjoy what you do. And let's go back to the very start we were talking about. It's our stories, our emotions, it's our past, it's us looking to the future. It's us pulling ourselves away from that. But I think, like anything, it's a practice. And that's what I mean about me and you being on this path, having these conversations. Grand, we found each other. We found things that we can kind of leverage and use. But I think that's the whole point of life. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It doesn't have to be a business. But we can leverage and use the things in our life as avenues to work through the fucking psychological blocks and emotions and barriers that we all fucking have.
Yeah. Okay, so tools and frameworks.
Yeah.
I hope at this point
we made some sense.
I hope we made some sense. But that people can start to maybe resonate a little bit with this feeling. It's a feeling at the start of, am I holding myself back? And you don't want to acknowledge that because there's discomfort, and it's almost like you're looking inwards is always difficult. All these things we talked about before. But hopefully there's a resonance now with there is so much more that I am capable of, and I am the one telling myself I'm not. Step one. Awareness, as always. How do we develop awareness?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said to you, sometimes it can be a fucking double-edged sword, having too much awareness. But I think the first thing is, I go back to it, is telling the truth. And that's why it can be quite difficult. I think having environment, we always talk about that. having people in your circle or in your environment you can genuinely be open and honest with and have a conversation to go, look, this is who I am and this is what I'm struggling with. And then they can reflect back to you going, yeah, no, you're full of shit here, or this is good here. And that's what I mean, maybe about the distraction or who you're surrounding yourself with can get a bit comfortable or certain. And that's why you're going to that coach. You're not necessarily learning anything new. Like you're not, granted, you are making space and time for it, but actually you're investing in yourself to keep yourself accountable.
So what I have found is accountability. I have found a comfortable space to experience discomfort. So with some of the questions he asked me, I'm very uncomfortable, but I'm very comfortable feeling that discomfort in that moment in time, if that makes sense, because I understand that this person is here to help me explore what this is. So now is a time when I'm not in my normal environment. Whereas if I was uncomfortable in my normal environment, there's a million things I do to make myself not uncomfortable, a million distractions that I have there that I can immediately reach for to stop me feeling uncomfortable. So that's what I go for, accountability as well. A help organizing my thoughts and identifying, really looking at and identifying triggers, environmental things, people who are reinforcing the stories I'm telling myself. Because whatever about me trying to go back into a million years ago and unravel my trauma, if I can identify things that are making it worse or reinforcing it. And for example, people hear this all the time about like people who are energy vampires or really negative, or people who are, when you say you want to do thing A, they're like, what you do thing A? Like people who don't support you and build you up, those kind of things. Identifying those really, really important. But doesn't have to be a coach. I think, again, having some sort of practice or regular time where you can just sit and be. And if it's writing or walking or talking or having a coach or doing breath work, just some space for your brain to go, okay, what's going on here? What can I see? In the present, I'm looking around. What am I seeing? What am I feeling? And I've experienced the more you do that, it becomes painfully obvious. So the second part of that awareness piece is when it becomes painfully obvious, that's also not the time to turn away. Just sit with that for a little while as well.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier on about people who are enlightened. I don't necessarily think they're going back and they're like thinking about the past and such. What is most meditation about, in my experience anyway, is acknowledging the thought and letting it go and being right here. And then acknowledge the thought and let it go and be right here. And why are we using the breath? Because the breath brings us back to the body and to the now. It's never about, okay, and what did your dad say to you? Okay, and when exactly did your mom tell you that you weren't going to go and do that school? Like it's none of that. It's just about acknowledge the thoughts and let them go and come back to the present. So
sorry, just as you're talking there, that's obviously what that past experience can do for you, is that you can let an emotion or an experience go from the past.
Yes.
And you're able to be more present.
And you can be more present.
It doesn't rule you.
Exactly. So all of that to say, some form of awareness practice, and it can be a reflection, it can be a meditation, it can be a walk, it can be a coach, it can be I think it's a great place to start on this journey, because it can seem like, how am I supposed to figure out what all my triggers are? Because personally, I have probably 50 million triggers. I'm never going to figure them all out, but at least I can see some recurring themes and patterns. And if I can spot the patterns, usually, okay, there's something in that pattern. Why am I doing that thing? Why am I afraid here? Why do I always get antsy around this person? You start to see those things. So.
Also, I think it's important to say here, because definitely on your journey and certainly on mine, to speak my own personal experience here, you have to be ready to make that change. Again, what you're learning now and what you're explaining now is nothing new. You've known this for years.
We've actually said on the podcast 10 times. Yeah.
But the difference is that you're in a space of your life and your business and your experience that you're ready for this. And even the decision I made myself, particularly professionally, I was only ready for it now. Again, obviously a lot of it we've been saying my own internal fears or whatever, but even just in terms of actually me making this decision, with the level of adaptation, understanding and emotions, I was ready for the change now. So there has to be a level of, which is difficult for me personally, self-compassion, that maybe you're not ready for the change you kind of want to make. So building the awareness and allowing that, like you said, to sit with it and accept it is big.
Actually, great point. We should actually say in the last 6 months, really, less. So you have started your own business, moved away from something that you built over years and years and years, and started another business, which is a massive change and something you had to kind of come to terms with, that this was needed for your growth and for your journey and for your direction, which was massive. And then when we sat down to do, like we do these kind of 60-day blocks where we're just a little bit, and we help each other a bit accountable or whatever like that. That was when I was like, do you know what? This business is ready to scale, but I am absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that was a real recognition for me, is that the business is ready to go. It's like
nothing is needed in the sense of what's going to be done. Or,
we don't need more marketing or more. The thing is ready to grow. It's like it's time for growth in the business. And I remember the two of us, I was like, what will I write down on the sheet? And I was like, I don't have the bandwidth for this. We're going to grow the business and get more clients, whatever's going to happen. And I am going to be the one who lets the whole thing down. I was like, okay, maybe the next 60 days it needs to be about me sitting with myself a little bit and figuring out, okay, why do I feel like that, and where are the areas I'm going to hold it back? Because we knew it, like, and then subsequently I had a couple of people and let me explain how I got the coaching. Within the space of 2 days, I had somebody in a business setting and somebody within 2 days. People don't know each other; they're in completely different worlds. Within 2 days, both people said the same thing to me in different contexts. In here, somebody said to me, it was like, there's more. There's way more here, and you probably know why it's not. And kind of like leading me to the point of, yes, it's me. And that's how...
And two of these lads can see the competency that you have done over the last couple of years. They've seen how great you've been.
Both said the exact same thing. Yeah. Everything you've done is brilliant. Love it. Amazing. It's incredible. We've experienced it firsthand. It's incredible.
But there's more.
But there's so much more. And
it's a you thing.
And it's a you thing. And it's so obvious. It's so obvious.
Well, I think that's important to say then, as someone who maybe wants to change, because what I would class that as is a synchronicity. And Carl Jung talked about this, the idea of having synchronicities in your life.
Yeah.
And they're genuine kind of callings, he would say.
That was a calling, yeah.
Yeah, from, again, your soul purpose or something to lean into. So a lot of these things that we may get synchronicity or callings, we choose to ignore, or maybe we don't see. So again, go back to you, Coach, being ready in that moment, us having that conversation, identifying things, everything going to yeah. Everything is synchronized into like, yeah, this is the path. It's so clear of where it has to go, and having an acceptance of that to be like, yeah, this isn't going to happen.
So to kind of bring that first point on then about the first thing you could potentially do, I still think the awareness thing works there then, because me and you have been fortunate enough that in both of our decisions there recently, it was made very clear to us, either by friction or by the daily experience we're having. Okay, this needs to change, and a change was made. But even if that's not immediately obvious to you, I do think that by creating that bit of space, we did an episode on space, go back and listen to it, creating that bit of space, you will have a higher chance of spotting the signals for change.
Yeah.
So maybe right now you just feel uncomfortable. But what change would I make? And I don't know if it's change. I think a little bit of time and space, and you'll spot the signals. And when you spot the signals, you can build some awareness around the signals. But why? And then maybe you can ask for help, or you can start to write on it, or whatever it might be. So for me, and a lot of these conversations come back to the same thing: create a bit of space.
But isn't it funny though?
Take the foot off the pedal.
Always come back to the same.
It's usually the same thing. Yeah. Just take the foot off the pedal a little bit. If you're not feeling good.
If you haven't listened to my latest episode on my podcast,
plug in your fucking podcast.
Because I did a micro episode. Daniel's like that. Called
micro episode.
Yeah.
It's not a micro episode. It's 10 minutes long.
But it's the say no framework. And the idea behind the say no framework is generally to say no to things to give you that space, as opposed to adding more or what should I do.
Yes.
There's plenty of things that we're saying yes to that we don't really want to, or we're doing it a habit or obligation. If you genuinely say no to, as an element of space now that can be allow that awareness to unfold by itself.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Oh, okay, let's plug that one. That's relevant. That's good. And then once you've kind of identified, okay, change needs to happen, of a bit of space, of a bit of awareness around it, some triggers. I think getting help with it is a good idea. But again, when I say getting help with it, I'm not referring necessarily to therapy. Unpacking and looking back, therapy, very, very important for people. Looking forward and getting support with that, I think environment is key. And by environment, I mean the physical environment and the people. People are so key in this, I find. Like, again, I've said it so many times, I would not be even thinking about these kind of things. I wouldn't be lucky and privileged enough to be sitting here having a conversation with you about these type of things if not for the people who surround me. My family, Jill, you, my friends, the people I work with, my parents. I have a very, very good environment of people who really want to see me do well and support me. And then when I express something that's difficult or concerning or vulnerable, I get nothing but positive. And that makes it much easier for me to go, okay, well, maybe I can lean into this. And then I have people, like I mentioned, those two people who said to me about what they could see.
Yeah.
They trusted that I would take that a certain way. And that was a gift they gave to me. They said to me, as a challenge, but also a gift, I know there's more. And I think you should lean into it. And that subsequently led me to the coaching and stuff. So like, it all seems very serendipitous, but if I'm thinking about how to manufacture that, once you have that bit of awareness and space, and you've thought, geez, John's actually, I don't really feel great whenever I speak to John. He's always kind of pulling my ideas down or whatever. But Mary, like, she's always spend a bit more time with Mary, or maybe share a little bit more with Mary, or identify areas. It doesn't have to be coaching or anything formal at the start. Just starting to engineer your environment to set you up a little bit more for success, I think is important. The same way you leave your runners out at night time if you want to go running the next morning. Think about who are the people who make me feel good? Where do I feel good? What am I doing when I feel good? Have a little think about that, because it's not going to help you with your ancestral trauma, but it's going to do two things. It'll regulate you in the moment, and it'll stop all the negative reinforcement of the story of you're not enough and you're weird and you're an outlier and you're strange and don't do that. And Jesus, we're all doing this thing. So again, a little bit of awareness around that can help you engineer that environment a little bit more. Every little chance you give yourself to move towards success is going to help. So like even small change is kind of a big difference.
Well, I think even what you're explaining there to me, what I'm getting up is the idea of the doing. There has to be an element of doing to build a level of, and nothing major, but some, like I said, action or movement forward towards a thing. And we are discussing here about the emotions and the trauma. We can still work on all of that, build the awareness around all of that, whilst moving forward slightly towards a thing. Because I think ultimately the level that we can get, and we both experienced it, is that momentum. Because once you start to actually reinforce the better story, once you start to take the action, something's just coming up there. Because I had a client today, actually, I think quite relevant. And I identified 3 things that we were going to work on with him. And it was a step-by-step process. Because actually, this is kind of what we're talking about here now. And what I identified with him was what we kind of needed to go through was a stage of vulnerability, acceptance, and then courage. Because he kept saying he's extremely overwhelmed. He's doing loads. He's very successful. But he kept saying he doesn't have the courage of certain aspects to lean in. And I was like, I think it's a bit unfair because there's so much good that you're doing. There's so much that you are doing. If we can take a step back, get you a bit more grounded to a level of acceptance. But actually the first step is that vulnerability.
Yeah.
Is that like, oh, I'm actually struggling here, or maybe I don't want to do this thing here. So I think it's a similar process here. And I think it's very difficult then to have that courage if you didn't have that acceptance and potentially that vulnerability initially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think a really important thing to note here is courage is not acting without fear. Courage is actually acting in the presence of fear. Otherwise, it wouldn't be brave. And what I like about all that is courage is a skill you can develop. The skill of being courageous, because once you've acknowledged that you're vulnerable and have a bit of fear around this, I think most of us decide to wait until the fear goes away to take the action. And that's why we're like, I don't have the courage to do it because I still feel the fear. Where actually we can develop the skill of, I feel the fear and I'm going to take the action despite the fear that I feel. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. I say it quite glibly there, but that is something we can work on. Okay, I'm not going to wait for the fear to go away because that's what most of us think. I'm not going to distract the fear away. I'm not going to tell myself that I will do this thing when the fear isn't here anymore because I'll have all these other things done, or I'll have the money, or I'll have to save that, and then there's no fear. And then that's not what it is. I think courage is understanding I feel uncomfortable, telling myself it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and now I'm going to take the action. Because what I was going to say before you jumped in there was an actual thing we can practice here at this point is reducing the time between identifying a thing you want to do or need to do and doing the thing.
Yeah.
The more time that's in there, the more time you have to ruminate. It's not even thinking. You're not even thinking.
There's more
about
hesitation.
It's hesitation, it's rumination, and it's more time for the story to take hold. Whereas if you can start to develop a system for reducing that time frame, it's going to help you bypass the fear.
Yeah.
And you are then courageous because you're doing it. You feel the fear, but you're doing it.
Yeah.
And the more time you sit in that fear, you will talk yourself into a state because you're leaning into these stories and these narratives. You're giving them time to take hold. But I think combining those two, understanding that courage is feeling it and doing it anyway, and reducing the amount of time it takes you to do it, really, really important. But you can't do either of those things until you've had some way of identifying the thing you actually want to do. Otherwise, you're randomly, aimlessly going around just doing things.
I think also that acceptance is important. Accepting where you are right now.
Yeah.
Because I think like we often do try to take more steps than we're potentially ready for. We don't have the foundations. We don't have the awareness. And then we again go back to those emotions of shame and kind of guilt. And like I said, for my client, it was like it was so evident that he was being a bit unfair on himself because he didn't have those kind of foundations. So that idea of the awareness, building the foundations, having consistent, to some degree, manageable action, and accepting this is where I'm at, builds the roadblocks to that courage, I think.
I love that. Okay, that's a nice little framework, actually. So vulnerability comes from awareness. Create the space. Be vulnerable with yourself.
Yeah, be honest.
And be honest.
Yeah.
Honesty, love that. Okay, be vulnerable, be honest with yourself, and you'll start to identify some of these areas. Accept that you feel this way.
Yeah, and where you are.
And
this
where
is
you
where
are.
I'm at.
This is where I'm at. And accept the emotion. This is a feeling. I feel afraid.
And also accept what needs to be done now, which is probably a smaller step than you would like.
Accept that this is the action that needs to be taken.
Yeah.
Accept that and try and remove yourself from that. So you've got your vulnerability, you've got your acceptance, and then courage. And view courage as a skill that you're going to develop and work on.
Yeah.
You don't have to have courage. It's not something someone has that you don't have. It's something that they do. They do courage. They do a courageous thing, which is they feel the same way that you feel, but they're taking the action. And that's the difference. It's the only difference in most cases.
It's that strong footing, though. It's so much easier to be courageous with that footing, foundation, experience. So that can come and that can be developed.
Exactly. And then the next time you do it, it comes back to the skill development we talked about earlier on. The next time you do that, you have that one tick in that side. I've already done this before. Okay, I've had this feeling before and I've done the thing.
Well, actually, let's just go back to your experience and my experience, because I go back to me. So I had no problem really being vulnerable. So say our relationship, say, of where I was at. You had no problem being vulnerable, but potentially both of us never really had the idea of the acceptance.
Yeah.
Until we did. And then that's where the courage comes
We
in.
definitely ruminated a lot in the vulnerability.
Yes.
Happy to talk about it, happy to share
go
about
back
it.
to the trauma and the struggle. Exactly.
And identify with it.
But then wasn't that a potential necessary adaptation to allow us to get to that acceptance level?
Yeah.
And without that acceptance level, it is very difficult to kind of try and move forward.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean though, about like you and your business, say, or what you're working through now. It isn't, it's not, I don't think it is I think this is the issue for all of us. It's all that personal psychological journey. And then there's just different elements in our lifetime of this vulnerability, acceptance, and courage.
Yeah.
You go through different cycles of that almost. And it's easier not to have to go through that and go back to that security or go back to that certainty. But is that living then? Like, do you need to go through that vulnerability, that acceptance, and that courage?
The golden question, man. It's linked in with like you have to have that rock bottom moment, that emotional heart attack, the physical heart attack to make a change. I stand by this. I said a lot more lately than I used to. I think there's many ways of living this life.
Yeah.
What feels for me, and through conversation for a lot of other people that I speak to, again within my own bubble, this seems to be a pathway I'm interested in exploring, because it has so far to this point unlocked new levels of experience for me.
Yeah.
It's made me enjoy my life more. It's made me appreciate experiences more. It's made my relationships deeper and richer. It's helped me understand myself a little bit more. It's led to a little bit less frustration. It's led to more subjective success for me. My life is more successful to me. It's helped me remove myself from measures of objective success. But I have not even slightly leaned into the level I want to lean in. I'm still not great at taking that last part, taking the action and having the courage. And that's now I'm at a level where I'm trying to understand what those beliefs are. So I've surpassed the beliefs that held me back from starting the business. Asking Jill out and like all those things that we do. So loads of us have done this. Look back on your life. You've so many examples of things you've done that were really courageous, that felt uncomfortable, and you did them anyway. This is just a deeper level, new devils.
Yeah,
and this can unlock a deeper level of experience. And I think from our perspective, and people who listen to this podcast, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a deeper level of experience and meaning. We're not trying to find a gazelle and hunt him down and kill him to feed our family. We're lucky that we're past that, and some people aren't. We're not, for most of us, battling plague and stuff like that. Like we're in a world now where we have loads of opportunity, but there's loads of different type of challenge for us. It's a new level, and we want a deeper level of human experience. So it's a very privileged thing to talk about. I'm fully aware of that, but it's relevant to millions and millions and millions of people. So it's definitely worth exploring. But I think looking back and finishing this on a positive, look back in your life if you're listening right now. There are so many examples of when you were courageous, where you were afraid and you did something anyway, no matter what you're doing. Again, it's not we talk about business, it's just contextual for us, but in your job, in your relationship, in your sport, whatever, there's loads of examples of you being courageous. So if you're telling yourself a story that you've no courage, it's not true. For most people listening to this, I would probably say everybody. So there's already evidence there. You're now at just a deeper level. It's level 2 or level 3 or level 5 or whatever it is. It's more challenging, but you have experience there. And with this process, I think it's a nice system for leaning into it.
And actually, as you're talking there, because we were meant to be doing a podcast episode on the...
I didn't think you were going to share that, because I wasn't going to call you out on it.
Adolescence, I'm only after watching 3 episodes, well, 2.5, because I fell asleep on the third one, and I'll watch the rest of them. And it's really good. But as we're talking about this kind of framework of vulnerability, acceptance, and courage, it could even fit in that narrative. And that's what I mean about the depth of what we're talking about here is so far removed from the success of the thing you are building, and more so, again, you as a man, and your development, and your understanding of self, and your potentiality.
And how you feel. Day to day.
Yeah.
How you feel about everything you do.
Yeah.
Run a company, work for somebody, play sport, have a family, don't have a family, whatever. It's how you experience the world. What you say earlier on, your perception is your reality. So if you crack this and go deeper into this and tell yourself slightly better stories, everything you do is going to be better. And that's my experience. My experience is everything I now do is better. And I want more.
And there's a potential then of, well, what else is there? You know, because there is, again, look what you have done and you have a lifetime to explore. So what else is there
Yeah.
if you keep leaning into that?
Yeah. Beautiful.
That is class. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely class. I have no idea how long we're going here. Probably
I've
just
no
over
idea
here.
if people can be made sense at all of that podcast because that was everywhere.
The last few have been chaotic, but we come out going, we listen back and go, it's pretty good. Really.
Yeah, and I actually know. I think that could be all right as well.
Look, again, I enjoyed the conversation, but I hope that makes sense. But anyway, that's what we're working on at the moment. That's what's going through the heads at the moment. And I think having a framework, it's so fundamental to my life.
Yeah.
Those stories, I'm seeing them everywhere now. So,
as in other people, or
no, well, yeah, I see them in other people too. It's easier actually because I see them in you all the time. You see them in me all the time. But,
well, it's easy because again, you're not in the situation.
It's not your story.
No, it's the outside in. It's so obvious.
It's so obvious.
But again, that's what we all would say. And the psychological barrier is ourselves.
Yeah.
It is our own doing. And I think we can all feel that.
It's so funny actually because we both work in a coaching capacity. Do you know, I'm using new language there.
Oh, yeah, nice.
We both work in a coaching capacity with other people, and we both have had coaches in the past as well. And it's so interesting that when we go into our coaching capacity, we're like, this is so fun. You can literally see it laid out. You're like, if we can do with this, and this is going to unlock this for you, and this for you, and this for you. But the person subjectively is feeling like this is impossible. And you can see it so clearly. And yet in your own story, you know it's the case intellectually, but emotionally, you just can't. It's so hard to unravel yourself from that story you're telling yourself. But yeah, so I'm laughing sometimes when I'm with a coach in any context. I know they can see me like and they're being really kind and well, let's work through this. Like as soon as I walk in, they're like, I know exactly what's going on here. It's still going to take us 6 months to get this guy to realize it for himself.
I think it's the whole point of this then is that I think that's the element of the coaching process and where you are in your own journey. That we all need that help. We all need that space, and we all need that. Go back to that framework: the vulnerability, the acceptance, and the courage. And life goes in cycles, you know. And this is, you said there, that new levels, new devils. I think we can all even feel that. If you really are trying to do something, either you haven't done before, there's an opportunity that you want to lean into, I think you're going to have to answer these questions. Yeah. Or at the very least accept some of these things.
Yeah. If you come out now with a program called Vulnerability, Acceptance and Courage and start to flog it, I'll be like, he's only using this as a platform to sell his fucking course. Brian, pleasure as always. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, sir.
What we probably will do, I'll make us accountable now on podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, you probably should make us accountable because you're an idiot and you're not letting us do it.
About what?
About a monthly episode of actually doing this.
Oh, no, we're doing it anyway. Yeah, we do an episode every month. We say this every month and then we do it every 6 weeks. But
yeah, exactly.
we're doing every month. But the next one, I think we should do sooner rather than later. We won't leave it a month because you want to cover that show. Because
well, I said to you, I watched the first 2 episodes in the one night and I didn't realize until I turned the TV off how much of it in a heightened state my body and my nervous system was. And I think it'd be a great conversation because you have great insight of the technical aspects of the recording of it and why it was so impactful emotionally, and then the actual story and narrative.
Yeah, that's a small part of it because you haven't watched the last 2 episodes. So it's more about the compelling nature of the subject matter. I think is really interesting. The technical side is really
but I think even that alone, it's everything.
It adds to it. Yeah, for sure, it adds to the story. But we'll cover that in its own podcast because it just was some stuff I'd love to talk to you about. Specifically because you're a father as well.
Yeah.
Because there's some deep issues in there. But look, Brian, pleasure as always. Thanks for your friendship and accountability.
Yeah, same to you, sir.
Yeah, and let's tell ourselves some better stories, people.
I'll see you next week and we can talk about adolescence.
Okay, we'll do next week.
Bye-bye.
Peace.